It started with a simple phone call.
A voice on the other end, calm but with a strange sense of urgency, said, "You should come back to Hollow Grove." Nathan, who had moved away years ago, didn't recognize the number. Hollow Grove wasn't the place he thought he'd ever return to. The small neighborhood was filled with memories, both good and chilling. But something in the voice, a familiar tone, perhaps, pulled him in. By the next evening, he was on the road. The closer he got, the more the memories seemed to blur with something darker. Something was waiting. When Nathan finally reached Hollow Grove, something felt off. The neighborhood looked eerily similar yet different. His old house, where he grew up, was still there. But the houses around it seemed abandoned, decayed. And there was no one in sight. Not a single soul on the street, no cars, no lights in the windows. It was as if the neighborhood had been deserted overnight. He parked in front of his childhood home and hesitated, feeling a chill crawl down his spine. The house had been sold long ago, but now it looked exactly as he had left it. Even the garden gnome his mom loved stood at the front steps, chipped and faded. But how? He shook off the unease and stepped inside. The house creaked with each step. Dust covered the floors, and the walls were lined with faded photos. Nathan noticed one that sent a shiver through him. A picture of his family on the front porch, with the neighborhood behind them. But in the background, the houses looked exactly as they did now, abandoned, broken, lifeless. It didn't make sense. He remembered those days clearly. The neighborhood was alive, bustling. How could this photo exist? A noise echoed from the back of the house. It was faint, but unmistakable, footsteps. Nathan froze, his heart pounding. Was someone else here? Or something else? He followed the sound, trying to stay calm. The noise led him to the living room, where he saw a faint outline near the window. A figure, staring out at the street, unmoving. As he got closer, he realized it was his old friend, Adam. But Adam hadn't lived here for years, he'd disappeared. Just like so many others from Hollow Grove. Adam. Nathan's voice trembled. The figure turned slowly, and Nathan stepped back in shock. Adam's face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked at Nathan, as if struggling to remember, then whispered, "They took us. They took everyone." Before Nathan could respond, Adam faded away, leaving behind only a faint shadow on the wall. The room grew colder, and the silence felt heavier. Nathan's mind raced. Who were they? And why did they take everyone?
Determined to find answers, Nathan walked through the neighborhood, past the houses that looked like empty shells of their former selves. As he reached the edge of the neighborhood, he noticed something terrifying. The road he'd come from was gone. Instead, there was a thick fog, stretching as far as he could see, swallowing everything it touched. It was as if Hollow Grove was isolated, trapped in its own ghostly reality. Panic rising, Nathan ran back to his car, but it wouldn't start. He was stuck. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from the same unknown number, *, "You came back. Now, you're part of it." *. Frustrated and terrified, Nathan shouted, hoping someone, anyone, would hear him. His voice echoed through the empty streets, but there was no response. He tried to remember more about that day Adam disappeared. He'd heard whispers, rumors that people in Hollow Grove were vanishing. His family had moved soon after, but he'd always thought it was just coincidence. Then, a memory surfaced. Tonight he'd seen strange lights outside his window. He remembered his parents telling him not to worry. But the next day, his friend Emily had gone missing. Her parents moved away soon after, refusing to talk about it. Nathan realized he hadn't been the only one to see the lights. Others had too. And each time, someone vanished. Determined to find answers, he went to the park where he used to play. The swings creaked in the wind, the slide rusted. It was empty, but the ground looked disturbed, as if something had been buried there recently. He began digging, his hands trembling. After a few minutes, he found a small box. Inside were notes, photos, bits and pieces of memories from the people who had disappeared. The notes were chilling. They spoke of a shadowy figure that would appear at night, beckoning them into the fog. One note read, "Once you see it, it never leaves you. It's like the neighborhood itself is alive, watching, waiting." Nathan felt his chest tighten. Was the neighborhood haunted? Alive? The fog began creeping closer, wrapping around the edges of the park, and he felt an overwhelming urge to leave. But as he turned to go, he saw figures in the fog, familiar faces from his past. Friends, neighbors, all staring at him with hollow eyes, whispering, "Come with us, Nathan." He ran, feeling the weight of their voices pulling him back. But the fog kept closing in, pressing against his skin like icy fingers. Finally, he reached his house, slamming the door behind him, his breath coming in short gasps. Just then, his phone buzzed again. It was another text, "There's no leaving, Nathan. You belong here." He looked out the window and saw the fog wrapping around his house, trapping him. With nowhere left to run, he sank to the floor, realizing the horrifying truth. He hadn't just returned to Hollow Grove. He had become part of it. Another lost soul trapped in a vanishing neighborhood that no one would ever remember.